Hey guys, welcome back to Boneshaker. This video is one of the more interesting videos of the series, I think. Basically because quite a lot of new things get done, but things that I've more or less been planning since the beginning of the coaster, like adding more path elements, redoing the station a bit to fit in more with the rest of the coaster, and starting work on the main street, which I've always planned to have in front of the coaster station. Now I wanted to take a bit of time to talk about the path elements specifically, as you can see me placing these benches around. And this is a tip which probably many people have already more or less realized, but something I wanted to say nevertheless, and I've gotten quite a few questions about this. Basically, you can see me using the 3D gizmo all the time, and it's something that I want to do because I want to make sure that every single object, if it's like a scenery kind of object that I want spread throughout the park, but that you kind of have to make yourself, like these lanterns or these benches, it just works so much better to make sure that every single part of that object is part of one building, so you can just kind of copy it around and move it as if it were a building, as I'm doing with these lanterns over here. And you can only really do that by making the scenery out of the, by using the 3D gizmo, which is why I want to use that all the time. And after you pretty much have done that, you can just copy that lantern or bench over throughout the park and sort of, you kind of just have to make the object once, and then you have a new scenery item that you can just use in whatever way or theming you really want to do. And the other thing which I wanted to do is redo this station, just because it looked like it didn't really fit in as much with the rest of the ride. There were like a couple of really small things that I wanted to do about it. It's more tweaking than really changing anything about the station. Like the general shape is gonna stay the same, I just wanted to have some slightly different colors and details here and there, because the rest of the ride has a lot of brassy, sort of dark colors at this point, but the station was still very much white, which I did because, well, it's made out of details that don't really have any other colors, but I figured it would be a nice opportunity to try and sort of recolor those things by placing things over them with some slightly different colors, with the more grassy, browny, dark colors that would fit in with the rest of the ride a bit more. And also look a bit at stuff like windows. I might get back at recoloring this arch. I gave up on that because I wasn't feeling like making that half circle, but I might just return to that in the future. I also wanted to do the top part a little bit again because it had that sort of Disney looking wooden texture on it, and I rather want to have something that is a bit darker, a bit more detailed, more interesting to look at, and some slightly less well, very bright and large windows, just some more light, or small windows I should say, that are sunken into the wall like that. And I kind of wanted to do the same with the windows over there. And also I wanted to redo this roof for a couple of reasons actually, and I might want to look at the rest of the roofs as well, because you might notice that the middle roof of the station disappears if you zoom out, which is not really noticeable on the time lapses because it's really fast, but basically the issue is that the brick piece which I made it with, which is like that battlement piece for the sandstone castle, like its LOD is made in such a way that some sides of the brick are still visible if you zoom out, but other sides disappear. So if you happen to make walls or roofs out of the sides that disappear if you zoom out, your building or roof just disappears if you zoom out too much, and that's kind of an annoying thing. So just, I guess, a casual warning: when you're using that piece, don't be me and don't rotate the wrong side to make your wall or roof, because I'm gonna have to look at that again at some point in the future. And yeah, that is pretty much the station. I wanted to do something with the pipe over here because I still had that bit of grass there, and I wanted to have something industrial, and I figured it would be kind of cool to have like a little gate with one of these things where they use that sort of support to get a pipe to go over the path. And what I also wanted to do, and this is something that I only recently discovered, and I was really surprised that it's actually possible, but you can have foliage within a building, so you can connect trees, for instance, to a building, just make a field of trees and copy that all over the place to instantly get many trees, or you can make planters out of them and just have the planters and the plant that comes in the planter as one building that you can just copy around and stuff like that, which I never realized before but actually turned out to be very handy in this case. So just decorating the place a little bit with some planters to make it look a little bit nicer. And over here I just wanted to have something really simple. It's nothing big, just I figured it would be nice to get a little factory like touch in here and have a small chimney, because it's Something that is, of course, like having the brick chimneys is very reminiscent of like, well, the steampunk theme in general. I just wanted to make sure that the chimney would be quite small, so it wouldn't really block the view of the weenie in the background, or I should just say the main hill of the coaster. And I kind of wanted it to be small as well, because otherwise it would like draw a lot of attention toward itself, and there's already a lot of stuff over here to look at, and I'd rather not have like this station and the hill which the coaster is going through and the chimney as sort of three main high points that all sort of draw attention. So I just wanted to have like a sort of small, low profile chimney over there, and just a bit more decoration in a sort of industrial style over here, because I figured I couldn't really do much else with that little space there. But I don't think I'll do much other scenery around that area, just to keep it a little bit more empty. Now over here is when I started work on the main street, and this is probably gonna require a bit of explaining as to what style I really want to go for. Because truth be told, when I started this series I said that I would go for a Victorian sort of architectural style. And while it's definitely seen as sort of like a separate period in time with a very distinct like style of buildings to it, the most, I think at least, the most defining thing of Victorian architecture is that it really goes back to older times. It's not the sort of postmodern and modern architecture of the 20th century, it's just taking older architecture and putting much more detail in it, all sorts of new decorations that are possible with new materials and machines and stuff like that. So yeah, that's the general idea, and I didn't really want to go for a very specific style within that, like Second Empire or Queen Anne, for example, which both of those are actually very much found in Disneyland's Main Street. I just kind of wanted to have a bit of freedom and just mix stuff up a bit. Because truth be told, the architectural styles in the Victorian period in general are also quite a bit of a mishmash of different elements in different parts of history, all thrown together into what was, well, looking good sometimes. And that's more or less also why I didn't really restrict myself to any given style or remaking any sort of building in general, just kind of looking at streets in London, and especially some streets in Leeds actually. And just taking some inspiration from that, and, well, just have some fantasies about how stuff would look. So this is by no means really supposed to be a realistic representation of a street in England or something like that. Just a bit of fun with making some slightly Victorian industrial looking buildings. Though I have to say I did take a lot of inspiration specifically from the Victoria Quarter in Leeds, which is actually really nice and has a lot of like these 19th century details, but class as well. And it was actually somewhat easy, since I just pretty much had to make this one part and copy that over, which is something that I'll try to do for the other buildings as well, just for the sakes of, well, saving time on this. But as you can see, it was pretty much also necessary, since I wanted to have a lot of details in here to kind of make the pieces of the game itself, well, unrecognizable almost in the buildings. So that's also why I wanted to mix a lot of stuff together, not really to mix them together, but sort of make new pieces in ways that you don't really see them in the pre-given pieces in the game, which are obviously pirate themed and don't really work out that well for the sort of steampunk theme that I'm going for here. And it's just going to be a pretty simple building. What I wanted to do as a general setup of the main street is just to make it sort of symmetrical, not make both sides exactly the same, but make them have sort of the same shape. So it's going to be just a standard sort of street with towers on both sides, which are going to look slightly different, but they're going to have the overall sort of same general look to them, and have a nice little spire at the end of it, and maybe some chimneys on the roofs and things like that is basically what I'm looking for. And since I want to go for a like sort of rough, industrial, and truth be told, also a bit English kind of style to them, I wanted to just use the brick walls mostly, and use other textures for the detailing, and use the pillars to get those sort of iron decorations underneath the buildings. I kind of would have loved to actually see some like Victorian arches with awesome details and decorations all over them, which is pretty much something I can't do, especially with the ironwork. So it's more or less trying to make it look as if it were like one of these Victorian decorated buildings, But yeah, that's the general idea and the general sort of thing that I'm trying to approach with this building in general. And especially since it's just such a sort of flat street building, just a town building in general, I did want to like have the details to make it look a bit more interesting, since I can't really rely on very interesting building shapes or anything like that. I would have actually liked to get in bay windows, because they're like quite a, well, typical sort of thing that you see in this type of architecture, but it's just something which I tried, and it was so painful to make that I figured, no, I'm gonna try to avoid that as much as I can. I'll get a few in, and some things that kind of stick out like bay windows, but it's not something I really want to go for. You might also notice that I just replaced the top of the roof with planks, which looks a bit odd, especially compared with the the sort of brick look of the sandstone part. But that was pretty much what I explained in the video earlier, the sort of top grey part, which I love to use for the roof and figured it had a really nice texture to use for this kind of thing. Turns out that that's one of the parts of the this object that disappears if you zoom out too much, so I can kind of recommend not using it and just going for the planks from the scenery instead, even though they are pretty high poly and they might start to lag your game a little if you place too many of this kind of roof, and it's also kind of annoying to stack all the planks together. I'm actually quite happy with how it looks. It's almost, at least if you look from far away and kind of squint your eyes, it's almost as if it's like this one of these metal plated roofs. Anyway, I also wanted to have a clock over here, and the first try was just kind of round and kind of looked like a clock, but I wasn't really happy with how that turned out, and so I wanted to go for something which is a little bit more time consuming and hard to do, and try to make an at least as perfect as I can circle by putting all of these very small pieces together to make the rim around the clock, which was definitely the hardest part. The inside of the clock is pretty simple, and well, the white background of it is just a fountain. I guess the only bad part about this is that I've tried to look for like a number of different objects using which you can make like the details on the clock itself, but the bell just turned out to be the best sort of thing there is. But now there is just a ton of bells inside this building, and that's also not the best kind of thing to have if you're looking at performance, especially given that I just simply wanted to copy this clock over to the other side to have it over there as well. But I just wanted to have a clock there. A pretty sort of standard thing in steampunk as well, almost as recognizable as gears, and often also kind of seen in combination with gears. So I just wanted to try to make a clock and give it a place somewhere. And since I figured the station building itself wouldn't really work out that well, it would be nice to just have a clock tower over here on the side of this building. And the only thing that I guess I did want to do with this building is to have the clock tower stick out a bit from the rest as well. As you might notice, all of the different parts of this building are actually different buildings, in fact, because I just had to copy over entire parts, but it does allow to have like some very slight offsets, which make it kind of look a bit more off-grid and interesting to look at. So you can set this clock tower just a couple of inches away from the rest of the building, which doesn't make a huge difference, but it still makes the building in general a bit more dynamic than just being one big square with details on it, which I usually try to avoid as much as I can. And on the side of this, I just wanted to have one small building. The main street is not going to be too big, so this will already be the last building of the main street on this side. I wouldn't even really call it a main street, it's just sort of a small themed area with which you come into the park, because this is supposedly like one part of a different park, and this street sort of makes the transition from the rest of the park into the steampunk area and sort of really properly introduces you into the area. And so it is kind of more or less, it does the kind of job that you would sometimes see in Disney parks, for example, where you have the buildings on one side and you go underneath them and end up in a different area. That's the sort of idea that I was going for here. And then there's also the path on the side, just to be able to connect that to some other part of the park which doesn't exist, since it's just one part of the park here. But I just wanted to have that connection to at least make it look as though this Boneshaker ride could actually fit as a separate area within a completely different park. Now, as for this little house itself, it's nothing too interesting. I just figured I kind of wanted to go for one of these Victorian looking buildings from Notting Hill, which have these funny little entranceways where there is a balcony that sticks out with some pillars and arches in front of the building, and that's the general idea I wanted to go for here. But aside from that, it's just a simple 2-story townhouse. It's a little bit lower than the real life counterparts as well, which the same goes for the townhouse building, or I should say the building on the left of this one, just because I wanted to keep these buildings a bit smaller since the main street, or I keep calling it a main street, well, since this area is pretty small anyway and there won't be too many buildings, it would just look a bit odd if the buildings that were there were really high, since this is also supposed to sort of form the transition from the steampunk area into whatever else follows, so it needs to blend in a bit with the foliage and not stick out too much. I should say though that I didn't really care that much for this building, enough to at least give it a fancy little dormer and some other parts of the roof that kind of stick out and have some details on it, but this is more or less just a little side building to make the shape of the street as a whole kind of, well, the way I wanted it to. But aside from that, I definitely wanted like most of the detail to be on the buildings which are most prominent, which is on this side of this little street, the building with the clock tower in it, and especially the clock tower itself. And on the other side, it's gonna be pretty much the partner of the building with the clock tower, which is gonna be a slightly different building with a slightly different tower with a slightly different spire on top of it, which will neatly sort of round off the introduction into this area. And that's basically that. So this is basically just a simple brick house with a bunch of random details that I felt like slapping onto it to at least give it a bit of a nicer touch. But aside from that, I'm not really sure what this building is actually all about. It's more or less just filler, which many main streets are more or less just, well, main centers of attention with some filler around it. Though I still wanted to give a bit of love to the filler as well, obviously, and actually try a bit to get these spires in. Something I still kind of feel bad about a little bit, or I don't really feel bad about, but I kind of wish there was, is like some really small pieces using which you can make like the tops of spires, like some really small decorations, which are like just a very minor point of buildings, but especially with Victorian buildings, you often have like these very small points of spires, or these very small little details on pillars, and it's stuff like that which is really hard to get in here, and which is pretty important to get like an atmosphere or an idea of a theme going beyond just the general look or shape of a building. So it's that kind of thing which I was missing here. Also some proper iron fences for the balconies, like it's either the really bulky sort of framework, which is obviously not really a proper fence, or it's the really small metal fence from the window balcony, which is just so small you barely notice it, so it's something I also prefer to not use unless it's for a spire. It works pretty well for that. And on this building anyway, yeah, moving on. On this building I wanted to have a Dutch gable, just because that's something I figured is actually pretty common in this kind of building. And this is also going to be near the gate. I had a little gate planned, or little, it's a pretty big gate actually. I had a gate planned just to get into the area, which is a nice way to get more framework and steel and steampunk industrial kind of feeling to this area, and also have a nice entrance way, like you pass underneath some sort of arch and then you feel like you're properly in the new area. So this building is just gonna sit right next to that gate and be very miserable and small compared to it, and so this building is also very filler. And it's pretty simple in its approach as well, just a Dutch gable with a couple windows. Though a small tip that I could give with this is that I did want to get like a couple of wooden posts and balconies in there, which you might have seen me sink into the building, which just kind of helped to bring out the details a little bit more, since the parts I used for the details, like the roof molding, which is this very greyish concrete, they have a really similar color, because the walls which I placed the roof molding on are just this sort of beige-ish, what do they call it again? Well, that beige-ish wall anyway. And there's barely any color difference between that, so I did want to have some posts in there to at least bring out the details a little bit more, but aside from that it's a pretty simple building. And in my dreams, I kind of saw this gate as one of those arches out of iron and a lot of interesting ornaments and decorations all over it and things like that. But this isn't my dreams, and there is no way I could really make that, and I figured the next best thing would be to try and get the few elements that I do have upside down and sideways from the bug from Alpha 2.0, I think, in here, just to make the sort of general shape of what I was looking for. And at some point in the future, I'll try to make a Boneshaker sign and put that on that thing somehow out of some elements. I'm pretty sure it should be possible to make like some small letters out of some pieces, especially this little beige wooden piece. So that's something I'm probably going to end up doing in the future. I also wanted to have some planters, and this is something which actually sold the main street. It actually made quite a big difference, since it's such a sort of gloomy set of buildings here with really dark colors, and it's really gritty, and I did want to breathe a bit of life into it and have it look a little bit more bright. So I wanted to have a few flowers in the form of hanging baskets, where you don't really see the baskets anymore, but that's pretty common, and also have some planters alongside the street. Now this is what it looks like from over here, where you really see the two towers in the distance as the big sort of thing that you're drawn toward, with the chimney and the entrance in the front, which really gives you like the foreground to the background. And here's the look of the tower in the end, or nearly the end. There are a couple of things that I might change about it in the future, but this is more or less it. So yeah, thank you guys for watching, and in the next episode I'll try to make the other side of the main street, and goodbye.